Hello! Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the setting of my book, Beyond the Next Star. The story takes place on the planet Lorien, which is an Antarctic, metropolitan Antarctica, basically. It's super cold, really icy, lots of jagged cliffs and iced over waterfalls, as beautiful as it is lethal. And I've talked a lot about how the setting of my stories is a lot based on where I travel or places I've lived, places I know, and which doesn't quite make sense considering the fact that I made up the planet Lorien. I did not do any space travel for research for this book. And, but I was inspired by a hiking trip with my husband in North Georgia. We went hiking for New Year's one year. And I don't know if any of you live in Georgia or have been to Georgia, but Georgia gets pretty hot. It's not known for being cold, but up in North Georgia in the winter during an ice storm, it gets pretty cold. So we went hiking and it ended up being like -2 degrees. And my husband gets pretty stubborn when it's time, when it's something he wants to do. So we wanted to go hiking, we had planned to go hiking, so by hook or by crook, we were going hiking. And so we get up there, super excited to get on the trail, planning to go to a falls trail to get some gorgeous pictures. My husband likes to take pictures, does a lot of landscape photography. And so he trudges forward into the woods and I follow behind him. And I would say about 2 hours into the hike, we started to realize that, there was no waterfall on this trail. So we were obviously on the wrong trail. But we kept going. He would not admit that we were on the wrong trail. And I have to thank him for that, even though it was the coldest, longest hike of my entire life, starving. We didn't have any snacks with us. I have to thank him because it was during that hike, in the cold, in the snow, that I was inspired to write Beyond the Next Star, thinking about how wouldn't it be wonderful if I could just be abducted by aliens and be anywhere but in this moment hiking. And then the scenery was quite beautiful with the ice, a layer of ice over all of the different trees and shrubbery, and pretty gorgeous. So that is how I envisioned the wilderness of Lorien to be. And so I'm gonna read you a snippet from Beyond the Next Star, and it's one scene in particular that is the most indicative of that hike that I took with my husband and representative of the sights and sounds in that moment. Delaney collapsed into a snowbank, protected from the cold by her custom-fit, fur-lined, hooded onesie and protected from the hard ground by the snow. She tried to catch her breath. Her lungs were burning, her legs were jelly, her sides were cramping. From her cocoon of fur and snow, she watched the first sun rise, its glow backlighting a blanket of clouds, and seriously considered the chances and merits of death by exercise. Of all the ways to die on an alien ice planet, exercise hadn't been her largest concern. Hypothermia? Possibly. Infection from a bacteria her body couldn't defend against? Certainly. Murder at the hands of the bitch who had shot Keel? Most definitely, especially after yesterday's close encounter. But not exercise. Granted, she'd never been particularly athletic, but she'd never considered running a lethal pastime until now. This wasn't her first collapse. She dropped exhausted into 3 different snowbanks this morning, so she knew that Turek would circle back when he realized she'd fallen behind. He'd yell, he'd cajole, he'd tell her she was a sweet, beautiful little diva, prop her back on her blistered feet, and take off again, commanding her to come. And she would, because where else did she have to go? The torture had begun nearly 3 hours ago. Turek had risen 2 hours before dawn, as usual, but instead of disappearing for an hour and 20 minutes, he dressed her in one of her new fur-lined snowsuits, complete with a fitted sheet now, and dragged her along on what was apparently his early morning routine. He ran. Mystery solved. No wonder he returned a stinky, sweaty mess every morning. No wonder he was so strong and muscular, his thighs the size of big tree trunks. The true wonder was that he expected her to keep up. The top of her head just reached his chin. She took 2 strides for each one of his, and he outweighed her by at least 80 pounds. But no, she was a diva for collapsing in a snowbank after 2 hours of keeping pace with him in an Arctic tundra. She caught her breath. Delaney's thoughts drifted back to yesterday's hike. She'd thought that outing exhausting at the time. Granted, worse than Torik's proclivity toward exercise had been the unexpected company. Torik knew the woman who had murdered Keel. More than that, he was friendly with her. He'd saluted her. He served her. And Delaney had lost her cool. Luckily, Torik just thought her shy, but the woman, Dore Nikiak Lorien, commander of the entire planet, if she translated her military rank correctly, was more perceptive. Delaney shuddered. Several minutes later, Torik still hadn't circled back. Delaney sat up and stood of her own volition. Her thighs were shaking. She locked her knees to remain upright and finally took real stock of her surroundings. The first sun had fully risen. If today had been a normal morning, she'd be enjoying a nice bowl of jijak in the comfort of Torik's dining nook, maybe pretending to eat another page out of his book on dirt and dressing for rounds. Instead, she didn't know where the hell she was. But she was cold and surrounded by ice and snow and spiny thorn bushes, the closest thing this planet seemed to come to vegetation. Presumably, she was somewhere on the Onic estate, but that was about as helpful as knowing she was somewhere on the planet Lorien. Her knowledge of local geography was too limited. She had no way of finding Torik or, preferably, escaping back to the castle. Or just escaping. Nostalgia choked her as sharp and radiating as a bee sting, and as potentially deadly. Delaney tipped her head back and breathed into the falling snow. The flakes were so thick that the white blanket of fluff high overhead might not even be clouds, but the dense blur of cascading snowflakes. They melted on her face at first, then started to chill her cheeks and stick. If she ignored the tundra surrounding her, the ice sculptures and jagged landscape and spiny bushes attempting to pass as plants, and if she kept her gaze filled with snow and sky, she could almost pretend she was back in North Georgia, high up on the Appalachian Trail, just outside Hiawassee in deep winter. There was even a section of trail that resembled this one, kind of, with its briars and the serene silence that snow and solitude gives any place. She'd hiked that trail dozens of times, content in its silent solitude, until that one January morning, she'd been alone in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now she was here on Lorien, once again surrounded by snow and silence, but not content at all.